In the early morning light of 1922, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley carefully brushed away millennia of accumulated dust from a cuneiform tablet buried deep within the ancient city of Ur, unaware that he was about to uncover one of humanity's most profound theological revelations. The clay tablet, bearing the impressed wedge-shaped marks that would later be translated as hymns to the storm god, Enlil, represented just one fragment of what scholars now recognize as the world's first comprehensive pantheon of deities, a complex theological system that emerged from the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers over 5,000 years ago, as Woolley's team methodically excavated layer upon layer of ancient Sumerian civilization. They discovered thousands of similar tablets, each containing prayers, hymns, myths, and religious instructions that collectively painted a picture of divine beings whose influences extended far beyond the boundaries of ancient Mesopotamia, shaping the religious consciousness of virtually every subsequent civilization. In the ancient Near East, the Mesopotamian pantheon, with its intricate hierarchies, complex relationships, and profound theological concepts, represents humanity's earliest systematic attempt to understand the divine forces that govern existence, mortality, and the natural world. These deities, born from the collective imagination and spiritual needs of the Sumerian people around 3500 BCE, would eventually evolve through successive Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian civilizations, each culture adding new layers of meaning, mythology, and religious practice while maintaining the fundamental theological framework established by their predecessors. Archaeological evidence from sites across modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Iran reveals that these divine beings were not merely abstract concepts, but were understood as active participants in daily life, requiring constant attention, offerings, and elaborate rituals to maintain the delicate balance between the mortal and divine realms. The discovery of massive temple complexes, or ziggurats, throughout Mesopotamia demonstrates the central role these deities played in ancient urban planning and social organization, with each major city dedicating itself to a particular patron, god or goddess who was believed to reside within the temple's sacred precincts and directly influence the city's prosperity, security, and cultural development. Cuneiform libraries unearthed at sites like Nineveh and Babylon have preserved extensive mythological cycles that reveal the sophisticated theological thinking of ancient Mesopotamian priests and scribes who developed complex narratives explaining everything from the creation of the universe to the establishment of human civilization, the cycles of agricultural seasons, and the ultimate fate of human souls after death. These stories, inscribed on thousands of clay tablets in multiple languages and preserved through careful copying and recopying over centuries, represent humanity's earliest attempts to create comprehensive explanatory systems for natural phenomena, social institutions, and existential questions that continue to occupy human thought today. The pantheon itself reflects the sophisticated understanding these ancient peoples had of natural forces, with deities governing specific domains such as water, wind, earth, fire, fertility, war, justice, and wisdom, each possessing distinct personalities, preferences, and spheres of influence that require different approaches to worship and propitiation. Modern scholars, utilizing advanced epigraphic techniques, linguistic analysis, and comparative mythology, have identified hundreds of distinct deities within the Mesopotamian pantheon, ranging from major cosmic forces like Anu, the sky god, and Enlil, the lord of wind and storm, to minor protective spirits and demons that govern specific aspects of daily life, creating a divine bureaucracy that mirrored the complex administrative systems of Mesopotamian city-states. The influence of these deities extended far beyond their original cultural context, with Mesopotamian theological concepts, mythological motifs, and religious practices spreading throughout the ancient world through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, ultimately contributing foundational elements to the religious traditions of Egypt, Canaan, Greece, and even distant regions of Asia and Europe. Archaeological investigations at temple sites throughout Mesopotamia have revealed sophisticated ritual practices, including daily offerings of food and drink to divine statues, elaborate seasonal festivals celebrating various mythological events, and complex divination systems designed to discern divine will and predict future events, all of which demonstrate the profound integration of religious belief into every aspect of ancient Mesopotamian society. The theological sophistication of Mesopotamian religion is perhaps best exemplified in texts like the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that describes the emergence of order from primordial chaos through divine conflict and cosmic organization, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, which explores fundamental questions about mortality, friendship, and the relationship between humans and gods through the adventures of a legendary king who seeks immortality but ultimately accepts the limitations of human existence. These literary masterpieces, discovered in multiple versions across different archaeological sites and time periods, reveal not only the narrative artistry of ancient Mesopotamian writers, but also the deep philosophical and theological reflection that characterize religious thought in this region, with concepts like divine justice, cosmic order, and human responsibility forming central themes that would later influence religious and philosophical traditions throughout the ancient world. The pantheon's evolution through different historical periods demonstrates the dynamic nature of Mesopotamian religion as political changes, cultural exchanges, and social developments led to modifications in divine hierarchies, the elevation of certain deities to supreme status, and the incorporation of foreign gods and goddesses into the traditional pantheon, creating a constantly evolving religious system that remained relevant and meaningful to successive generations of worshippers. Temple archives from sites like Kanish and Nuzi provide detailed records of religious personnel, including high priests, priestesses, musicians, and temple servants, revealing the complex social and economic structures that supported religious activities and demonstrating how religious institutions served not only spiritual needs, but also functioned as centers of education, economic activity, and cultural preservation. The artistic representations of these deities, preserved in sculpture, relief carvings, cylinder seals, and other material culture, provide visual evidence of how ancient Mesopotamians conceived their gods, with iconographic traditions that associated specific symbols, animals, and attributes with particular deities, creating a visual language that could communicate religious concepts across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Modern archaeological techniques, including stratigraphic excavation, ceramic analysis, and dating methods like radiocarbon testing and thermoluminescence, have enabled scholars to trace the development of religious practices and beliefs through time, revealing how certain deities gained or lost prominence, how religious festivals evolved, and how theological concepts spread from one culture to another. Through processes of cultural diffusion and religious syncretism, the discovery of personal religious objects, including amulets, household shrines, and private devotional texts, demonstrates that Mesopotamian religion was not limited to official state ceremonies, but permeated daily life, with individuals and families maintaining personal relationships with protective deities and participating in religious practices that address concerns about health, prosperity, protection from evil, and success in various endeavors. The primordial foundations of Mesopotamian theology emerged from the earliest Sumerian settlements along the banks of the ancient waterways, where agricultural communities first began to conceptualize divine forces as explanatory mechanisms for the natural phenomena that govern their survival and prosperity. Archaeological evidence from sites like Eridu, Tel Es-Sawan, and Chogamami reveals that religious practices associated with water deities and fertility spirits can be traced back to the Ubaid period, approximately 650-380 BCE, when early Farming communities developed sophisticated irrigation systems that required collective labor and coordination, fostering the social structures that would eventually support organized religious institutions. The transition from simple agricultural shrines to elaborate temple complexes represents a fundamental shift in Mesopotamian society, as evidenced by the architectural evolution documented at sites like Uruk, where successive building phases show increasingly sophisticated religious structures culminating in the massive white temple complex that dominated the city's landscape by 30 to 100 BCE. Excavations conducted by the German Archaeological Institute have uncovered stratified deposits containing thousands of votive offerings, including carefully crafted figurines representing worshippers in attitudes of prayer, elaborate ceremonial vessels decorated with religious motifs, and inscribed objects bearing some of the earliest known divine names in cuneiform script, providing concrete evidence for the gradual development of specific deity cults during the late Uruk and early dynastic periods. The iconographic evidence from cylinder seals discovered in archaeological context throughout Mesopotamia demonstrates that by 3000 BCE, Sumerian religious art had established standardized representations for major deities, with Anu consistently depicted wearing the horn crown that symbolized divine authority, Enlil, associated with a lion-headed eagle that represented his dominion over storms and wind, and Inanna shown with the 8-pointed star that became her eternal symbol. Throughout subsequent millennia, cuneiform administrative texts from temple archives at Phara, Abu Salabik, and other early dynastic sites provide detailed inventories of religious personnel, temple properties, and ritual activities, revealing that organized priesthoods were already maintaining complex hierarchies, conducting regular ceremonies, and managing extensive economic resources dedicated to divine service by 2600 BCE. The earliest mythological compositions, preserved in fragmentary form on tablets from sites like Nippur and Ur, established the fundamental cosmological framework that would characterize Mesopotamian theology throughout its long history, describing a universe structured in 3 levels, with Anu ruling the heavens, Enlil governing the earth and atmosphere, and Enki controlling the subterranean freshwater realm known as the Abzu. Archaeological investigation of early dynastic temple complexes reveal sophisticated ritual practices, including the daily care and feeding of divine statues, understood as literal embodiments of the deities, elaborate processions during religious festivals that involve entire urban populations, and complex divination procedures utilizing liver examination, dream interpretation, and astronomical observation to discern divine will and maintain proper relationships between human communities and their patron deities. The material culture associated with early Mesopotamian religion demonstrates the integration of religious belief into every aspect of daily life, with excavated household contexts yielding numerous amulets, figurines, and ritual objects that protected individuals and families from malevolent forces while ensuring divine favor and activities, ranging from childbirth and agriculture to trade and warfare. Textual evidence from the Pharaoh and pre-Sargonic periods reveals that Mesopotamian priests had already developed sophisticated theological concepts, including the notion of divine me, or fundamental principles that govern cosmic order and civilized behavior, which were believed to have been distributed among various deities according to their specific domains of authority and responsibility. The gradual standardization of religious practices across different Sumerian city-states, evidenced by similarities in temple architecture, ritual objects, and mythological traditions found at sites throughout southern Mesopotamia, suggests the emergence of a shared theological framework that transcended local political boundaries and created cultural unity among diverse urban communities. Archaeological evidence for the early development of religious literature includes the discovery of scribal training exercises from temple schools, where young priests learned to copy and transmit sacred texts, ensuring the preservation and dissemination of theological knowledge across generations and maintaining the continuity of religious traditions. Despite political upheavals and cultural changes, the sophisticated understanding of divine personalities revealed in early mythological texts demonstrates that Sumerian theologians conceived their deities as complex beings with individual characteristics, personal relationships, and emotional responses, creating narrative frameworks that could address fundamental human concerns about justice, mortality, suffering, and the meaning of existence within a cosmic context governed by divine will. The influence of geographical and environmental factors on early Mesopotamian theology is evident in the prominence of deities associated with water, fertility, and agricultural abundance, reflecting the central importance of irrigation agriculture and the constant threat of floods, droughts, and other natural disasters that could devastate entire communities and require divine intervention to prevent or mitigate. The archaeological record from early temple sites reveals evidence for elaborate ritual meals, musical performances, and dramatic presentations that recreated mythological events, suggesting that Mesopotamian worship involved sophisticated artistic and cultural activities that served both religious and social functions. Within ancient urban communities, early administrative texts from temple archives document the complex economic relationships between religious institutions and secular authorities, with temples serving as major landowners, employers, and centers of craft production while maintaining their primary spiritual functions and contributing to the overall prosperity and stability of Mesopotamian city-states through their religious and economic activities. The pantheon's hierarchical structure reflects the sophisticated political and social organization of Mesopotamian civilization, with major deities arranged in complex relationships that mirror earthly patterns of authority, kinship, and territorial control while simultaneously transcending human limitations through their cosmic powers and immortal nature. At the apex of this divine hierarchy stands Anu, the ancient sky god whose authority over the heavenly realm established him as the ultimate source of divine legitimacy and cosmic order. Though his relatively passive role in most mythological narratives suggests that Mesopotamian theologians conceive supreme divine authority as transcendent and removed from direct intervention in worldly affairs. Archaeological evidence from the Anu temple at Uruk, with a successive rebuilding phase spanning over 3 millennia, demonstrates the enduring importance of this deity, while revealing how religious architecture evolved to accommodate changing theological concepts and ritual requirements throughout different historical periods. Enlil, the Lord of Wind and Storm, occupies a central position in the pantheon as the active ruler of earthly affairs, responsible for executing divine decrees, controlling weather patterns, and determining the fate of human civilizations through his power to bring both destructive storms and life-giving rains to the agricultural communities that depended entirely upon favorable climatic conditions for their survival and prosperity. Excavations at Nippur, Enlil's primary cult center, have revealed extensive temple complexes, religious archives containing thousands of hymns and prayers addressed to this deity, and evidence for elaborate festivals celebrating his role as the divine authority who legitimized earthly rulers and maintained cosmic order through his control over natural forces. The goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, represents perhaps the most complex and multifaceted divine personality in the Mesopotamian pantheon, embodying seemingly contradictory aspects of love and warfare, fertility and destruction, civilized culture and untamed natural power, reflecting the sophisticated theological understanding that divine forces could not be reduced to simple categories but required nuanced interpretation and careful ritual management. Archaeological investigation of Inanna's temples at Uruk and other sites has uncovered evidence for sacred prostitution, elaborate ceremonial banquets, and dramatic ritual performances that reenacted the goddess's mythological journey to the underworld, demonstrating how religious practices address fundamental human concerns about sexuality, death, and the cycles of natural renewal. Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, and craftsmanship, serves as the divine patron of human civilization, responsible for teaching essential skills, establishing social institutions, and providing the knowledge necessary for survival and cultural development, while his association with the subterranean Absa connects him to the mysterious sources of fertility and creativity that enable both natural and cultural productivity. The extensive mythology surrounding Enki, preserved in texts like the Sumerian creation accounts and flood narratives, reveals sophisticated theological reflection on the relationship between divine wisdom and human knowledge, the moral implications of technological advancement, and the complex negotiations required to maintain proper relationships between divine and mortal realms. Marduk's rise to prominence during the Babylonian period represents a significant evolution in Mesopotamian theology, as political changes led to the elevation of Babylon's patron deity to supreme status within the pantheon, requiring extensive theological justification and mythological reconstruction to integrate this relatively minor god into the established cosmic hierarchy without completely disrupting traditional religious beliefs and practices. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic composed to legitimize Marduk's supremacy, demonstrates the sophisticated literary and theological techniques employed by Mesopotamian priests to address religious and political challenges, creating compelling narratives that satisfied both theological requirements and political necessities, while maintaining continuity with established religious traditions. Archaeological evidence from Babylon's temple complexes, particularly the famous ziggurat known as Enki, reveals the massive resources devoted to Marduk's worship and the central role his cult played in Babylonian imperial ideology, with elaborate New Year festivals that involve the entire population, and ceremonies celebrating divine kingship and cosmic renewal. The goddess Ereshkigal, ruler of the underworld, represents the Mesopotamian understanding of death and the afterlife, as a distinct divine domain requiring its own complex administrative structure and ritual protocols, with her realm serving as the ultimate destination for all mortal beings, regardless of their earthly status or achievements, reflecting realistic assessments of human mortality and the limitations of earthly power. Textual evidence for underworld mythology, including Inanna's descent and various other catabasis narratives, reveals sophisticated theological concepts about the relationship between life and death, the possibility of resurrection or return from the dead, and the moral and cosmic significance of the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The storm god Adad, known by various names throughout Mesopotamian history, embodies the crucial but dangerous power of weather, capable of bringing life-sustaining rains and devastating floods, reflecting the constant anxiety agricultural communities experience regarding climatic conditions and their need to maintain proper relationships with the divine forces that controlled their environmental fate. Archaeological investigation of temples dedicated to weather deities throughout Mesopotamia has revealed evidence for elaborate rainmaking ceremonies, ritual objects designed to influence atmospheric conditions, and offerings specifically intended to prevent destructive storms while encouraging beneficial precipitation during appropriate seasons. The sun god Shamash represents divine justice and cosmic order, serving as the ultimate judge of human behavior and the guarantor of legal and moral principles, with his daily journey across the sky symbolizing the constant divine surveillance that ensures proper conduct and punishes violations of divine law and social order. Temple archives from sites like Sippar and Larsa contain extensive legal documents and royal inscriptions that invoke Shamash's authority to legitimize judicial decisions and royal decrees, demonstrating how religious beliefs about divine justice were integrated into practical legal and political systems. The moon god Sin, whose cyclical phases provided one of the earliest and most reliable methods for measuring time and organizing agricultural and religious activities, represents the Mesopotamian understanding of cosmic rhythms and their influence on earthly affairs, with its cult centers in Ur and Haran serving as major centers for astronomical observation and calendar development. The war goddess Ishkur and other martial deities reflect the constant military conflicts that characterize Mesopotamian political life, providing divine sanction for warfare while establishing moral and ritual constraints on violent behavior, creating theological frameworks that could address the moral complexities of organized violence within civilized communities. The craftsman god Ninurta embodies divine patronage of human technology and agricultural development, responsible for teaching metallurgy, toolmaking, and farming techniques while also serving as a warrior deity who battles chaotic forces that threaten civilized order, demonstrating the integration of technological, agricultural, and military concerns within Mesopotamian religious thought. The complex mythological narratives that define relationships between Mesopotamian deities reveal sophisticated theological concepts about cosmic order, divine justice, and the fundamental forces that govern existence, mortality, and the natural world, with these stories serving not merely as entertainment, but as explanatory frameworks that address the most profound questions confronting human consciousness in ancient times. The creation mythology preserved in texts like the Enuma Elish and various Sumerian cosmogonic accounts describes the emergence of organized reality, from primordial chaos through divine conflict and cosmic organization, establishing fundamental theological principles about the relationship between order and disorder, the necessity of divine authority, and the cosmic significance of established hierarchies and social institutions. Archaeological evidence from temple libraries at Assurbanipal's palace in Nineveh and other major cuneiform archives reveals that these mythological narratives were carefully preserved, copied, and transmitted across centuries with scribal colophons, indicating systematic efforts to maintain textual accuracy while allowing for minor modifications that reflected changing theological emphasis and cultural contexts. The Atrahasis epic, one of the most complete flood narratives from ancient Mesopotamia, explores fundamental questions about divine-human relationships, the limits of divine patience with human behavior, and the moral complexities involved in cosmic justice, while simultaneously addressing practical concerns about overpopulation, resource management, and environmental sustainability that remain relevant to contemporary global challenges. Textual analysis of multiple versions of flood narratives from different sites and time periods reveals sophisticated literary techniques employed by Mesopotamian authors to create compelling narratives that could simultaneously entertain audiences, preserve theological knowledge, and transmit cultural values across generations, demonstrating the integration of artistic, religious, and educational functions within ancient literary traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh, perhaps the most famous Mesopotamian literary composition, addresses fundamental existential questions about friendship, mortality, the meaning of life, and the relationship between civilization and nature through the adventures of a legendary king who ultimately accepts the limitations of human existence, while achieving a form of immortality through cultural memory and literary preservation. Archaeological discoveries of Gilgamesh tablets at sites throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, including versions in multiple languages and cultural adaptations found as far away as Anatolia and the Levant, demonstrate the widespread appeal and cultural influence of this narrative, which continues to resonate with modern audiences and inspire contemporary literary and artistic works. The mythological cycles associated with Inanna and Dumuzi explore themes of love, death, seasonal renewal, and the relationship between fertility and mortality through narratives that connect divine personalities to natural cycles and agricultural rhythms, providing theological frameworks for understanding the connection between human sexuality, natural fertility, and cosmic order. Ritual texts from temples dedicated to these deities reveal elaborate ceremonial reenactments of mythological events, including sacred marriage ceremonies that involve high-ranking religious and political officials and dramatic performances designed to ensure agricultural fertility and maintain proper relationships between human communities and divine forces. The underworld mythology preserved in texts like Inanna's Descent and the Death of Dumuzi addresses universal human concerns about mortality, grief, and the possibility of return from death, while establishing theological principles about the relationship between life and death, the authority of underworld deities, and the cosmic significance of seasonal change and renewal. Comparative analysis of Mesopotamian underworld mythology with similar narratives from other ancient cultures reveals both universal human concerns about death and distinctive features of Mesopotamian theological thought, including concepts about the equality of all humans in death, the grim but orderly nature of the afterlife, and the limited possibility of return from the realm of the dead. The combat mythology associated with deities like Marduk, Inanna, and other divine warriors explores themes of cosmic order versus chaos, the necessity of violence in maintaining civilization, and the moral complexities involved in the use of force to protect community values and social institutions, providing theological frameworks for understanding warfare, political authority, and the relationship between power and responsibility. Archaeological evidence for the ritual reenactment of combat mythology includes ceremonial weapons, dramatic masks and costumes, and elaborate festival preparations that involved entire communities and performances designed to renew cosmic order and ensure divine protection against chaotic forces that constantly threaten civilized life. The wisdom literature associated with deities like Enki and Enki addresses questions about knowledge, creativity, moral decision-making, and the relationship between divine and human wisdom, exploring the benefits and dangers of intellectual advancement, while establishing theological principles about the proper use of knowledge and the moral responsibilities that accompany intellectual power. Textual evidence for the integration of mythological themes into educational curricula reveals that Mesopotamian schools use these narratives to teach not only literary and linguistic skills, but also moral values, theological concepts, and cultural knowledge necessary for full participation in civilized society, demonstrating the multifunctional nature of mythological literature in ancient educational systems. The agricultural mythology that connects various deities to farming activities, seasonal changes, and fertility cycles reflects the fundamental importance of agriculture in Mesopotamian society, while providing theological explanations for natural phenomena that could not be understood through empirical observation alone, creating religious frameworks that made environmental uncertainty more psychologically manageable. Royal mythology that associates earthly rulers with divine authority explores complex questions about political legitimacy, the relationship between human and divine justice, and the moral obligations that accompany political power, providing theological frameworks that could both support and constrain royal authority while maintaining social stability and cultural continuity. The prophetic and apocalyptic elements present in some Mesopotamian mythological texts address concerns about the future, divine judgment, and the ultimate fate of human civilization, revealing sophisticated theological reflection about historical change, moral accountability, and the cosmic significance of human choices and cultural developments. The elaborate ritual practices and ceremonial systems associated with Mesopotamian deities demonstrate the sophisticated integration of religious belief into daily life, seasonal activities, and major life transitions, with archaeological evidence revealing complex temple hierarchies, extensive festival calendars, and intricate ceremonial protocols that required substantial community resources and widespread popular participation to maintain properly. Excavations of major temple complexes throughout Mesopotamia have uncovered evidence for daily rituals involving the care and feeding of divine statues, including elaborate meals served to deity images regular clothing changes, musical performances, and ritual cleansing ceremonies that maintain the physical and spiritual purity necessary for effective divine-human communication. Temple archives from sites like Drahum and Kanish contain detailed administrative records, documenting the complex logistics required to support religious activities, including inventories of livestock for sacrificial offerings, textile production for divine garments, and precious metal working for ritual objects, revealing the massive economic investment ancient communities made in maintaining proper relationships with their deities. The ziggurat complexes that dominated Mesopotamian urban landscapes represent architectural achievements that required sophisticated engineering knowledge, enormous labor investments, and coordinated planning spanning multiple generations, with these massive structures serving not only as platforms for divine worship, but also as symbols of community identity, political authority, and cultural achievement that proclaimed the prosperity and piety of their builders to neighboring cities and future generations. Archaeological investigation of ziggurat construction techniques reveals advanced understanding of structural engineering, including the use of bitumen waterproofing, reed matting reinforcement, and carefully planned drainage systems that enabled these massive buildings to survive for millennia despite the challenging environmental conditions of the Mesopotamian floodplain. The seasonal festival cycles that structured Mesopotamian religious life demonstrate sophisticated astronomical knowledge and careful coordination between religious authorities and agricultural activities, with major celebrations timed to coincide with solstices, equinoxes, and other celestially determined events that mark crucial transitions in the agricultural year. The Akitu festival, celebrating the Babylonian New Year, involved elaborate 11-day ceremonies that included dramatic reenactments of creation mythology, ritual purification of the king and temple, and public processions that involved the entire urban population in activities designed to renew cosmic order and ensure divine favor for the coming year. Textual evidence for royal participation and religious ceremonies reveals the complex relationship between political and religious authority, with kings required to undergo ritual purification, receive divine legitimation from high priests, and demonstrate their fitness to serve as earthly representatives of divine will. Through participation in elaborate ceremonial protocols, the institution of sacred marriage, documented through ritual texts and archaeological evidence from various temple sites, involved high-ranking religious and political officials in ceremonial unions designed to ensure fertility, prosperity, and divine favor, while simultaneously demonstrating the integration of sexuality into religious practice and the cosmic significance attributed to human reproductive activity. Archaeological discovery of elaborate ritual objects, including ceremonial weapons, ornate vessels, precious jewelry, and sophisticated musical instruments, demonstrates the artistic and technological sophistication devoted to religious activities, with craftsmen creating objects of extraordinary beauty and symbolic complexity specifically for use in divine worship. The extensive musical traditions associated with Mesopotamian worship, evidenced by the discovery of lyres, drums, and other instruments in temple contexts, reveal sophisticated understanding of music's power to create sacred atmosphere, facilitate communication with deities, and coordinate large-scale ceremonial activities involving hundreds or thousands of participants. Divination practices documented in cuneiform texts demonstrate systematic attempts to discern divine will through various techniques, including liver examination, dream interpretation, astronomical observation, and oil-on-water patterns, with these methods requiring extensive training, specialized knowledge, and careful interpretation that made divination a crucial component of religious and political decision-making. The training of religious personnel, documented through temple school curricula and administrative records, involve years of education in cuneiform literacy, ritual protocol, theological knowledge, and specialized skills like music, divination, and temple administration. creating professional priesthoods that maintained religious traditions while adapting to changing social and political circumstances. Archaeological evidence for religious drama and theatrical performances includes masks, costumes, and staging areas within temple complexes, suggesting that Mesopotamian worship involved sophisticated artistic presentations that combine narrative, music, and visual spectacle to create powerful religious experiences for participants and observers. The integration of healing practices into religious ritual demonstrates Mesopotamian understanding of the connection between spiritual and physical well-being, with temple personnel serving as both religious leaders and medical practitioners who utilize combinations of prayer, herbal remedies, and ritual techniques to address illness and promote health. Private religious practices documented through household archaeological contexts reveal that ordinary individuals maintain personal relationships with protective deities through household shrines, amulets, and private devotional activities that complemented but did not replace participation in community religious ceremonies. The elaborate burial practices associated with high-ranking religious officials, evidenced by discoveries at sites like Mari, demonstrate belief in continued existence after death, and the importance of proper ritual preparation for the transition to the underworld, with grave goods including religious texts, ritual objects, and offerings designed to ensure safe passage and continued divine favor in the afterlife. The architectural integration of religious and secular spaces within Mesopotamian cities reveals the central role of religious institutions in urban planning and social organization, with temple complexes serving not only as worship centers but also as economic hubs, educational institutions, and administrative centers that contributed to overall community welfare and cultural development. Pilgrimage practices documented through textual sources and archaeological evidence demonstrate that religious devotion could involve extensive travel to visit important cult centers, with pilgrims bringing offerings, seeking divine favors, and participating in religious ceremonies that connected local communities to broader regional and international religious networks. The profound theological concepts embedded within Mesopotamian religious thought reveal sophisticated attempts to address fundamental questions about the nature of divinity, the structure of reality, and humanity's place within cosmic order, with these intellectual achievements representing some of the earliest systematic philosophical and theological reflection in human history. The concept of divine me, fundamental principles or powers that govern various aspects of existence and civilized behavior, demonstrates Mesopotamian understanding that reality operates according to underlying laws and principles that transcend human understanding while remaining accessible through proper religious knowledge and ritual practice. Archaeological evidence for the practical application of theological concepts includes legal codes, administrative procedures, and social institutions that explicitly invoke divine authority and incorporate religious principles into secular governance, revealing the integration of theological thought into practical decision-making and community organization. The sophisticated understanding of cosmic geography revealed in Mesopotamian religious texts describes a three-tiered universe with distinct realms for different categories of beings, elaborate geographical features within each realm, and complex relationships between various cosmic regions that require careful navigation through ritual knowledge and divine assistance. Textual analysis of creation accounts reveals sophisticated reflection on questions about ultimate origins, the relationship between order and chaos, and the cosmic significance of divine conflict and cooperation, with these narratives addressing fundamental philosophical problems about causation, purpose, and meaning that continue to occupy human thought today. The theological concept of divine assembly, where deities gather to make collective decisions about cosmic affairs and human fate, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of governance, collective responsibility, and the distribution of authority within complex systems. while providing models for earthly political institutions and decision-making processes. Archaeological investigation of temple archives has revealed extensive theological literature, including hymns, prayers, and doctrinal texts that demonstrate systematic attempts to understand divine nature, appropriate worship practices, and the moral implications of religious belief, with this literature representing sophisticated theological scholarship that parallels developments in other ancient civilizations. The Mesopotamian understanding of divine justice, revealed through legal texts, mythological narratives, and ritual practices, explores complex questions about moral responsibility, collective punishment, divine mercy, and the relationship between earthly and cosmic law, providing theological frameworks that influence legal and ethical thought throughout the ancient world. The concept of substitute sacrifice, where animals or objects could serve as replacements for human offerings, demonstrates sophisticated theological reflection about the nature of divine-human relationships, the mechanics of ritual efficacy, and the moral implications of religious practice, while addressing practical concerns about resource allocation and community welfare. Textual evidence for debates between different theological schools reveals that Mesopotamian religious thought was characterized by intellectual diversity, scholarly disagreement, and ongoing theological development rather than rigid doctrinal uniformity, with different cities and time periods producing varying interpretations of fundamental religious concepts and practices. The integration of astronomical observation into religious practice demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the relationship between celestial phenomena and earthly affairs, with elaborate systems of correspondence between divine activities and natural cycles that required extensive observational data and mathematical calculation to maintain accurately the theological treatment of suffering, mortality, and divine justice revealed in texts like the Babylonian Theodicy explores fundamental questions about the relationship between moral behavior and worldly success, the nature of divine justice, and the problem of undeserved suffering, addressing existential concerns that remain central to religious and philosophical thought. Archaeological evidence for the evolution of theological concepts through time reveals that Mesopotamian religion was characterized by dynamic development rather than static tradition, with new ideas, practices, and interpretations emerging in response to changing social conditions, cultural contexts, and intellectual developments that challenged established beliefs and practices. The concept of personal deity, where individuals could maintain direct relationships with protective divine beings, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of individual religious experience, while maintaining integration with community religious institutions, providing theological frameworks that could address both personal and collective spiritual needs. The Mesopotamian treatment of religious prophecy and divine revelation reveals sophisticated understanding of communication between divine and human realms, including concepts about inspired speech, symbolic vision, and the interpretation of divine messages that influence prophetic traditions throughout the ancient world and continue to influence religious thought today. The theological implications of royal ideology, where earthly rulers claim divine sanction and authority, explore complex questions about political legitimacy, the relationship between human and divine governance, and the moral obligations that accompany political power, providing intellectual frameworks that influence political theory and practice throughout ancient history. The integration of wisdom literature into religious tradition demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the relationship between practical knowledge and spiritual insight, with theological concepts about divine wisdom informing approaches to education, moral development, and intellectual achievement that contributed to cultural advancement and social stability. The Mesopotamian treatment of religious law, including concepts about divine commandments, ritual requirements, and moral obligations, reveals sophisticated legal and ethical thinking that influenced the development of religious law throughout The ancient world, with principles and procedures that continue to influence religious and legal traditions today. The theological concept of cosmic renewal, where divine activities periodically restore order and vitality to the universe, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of cyclical time, historical change, and the ongoing maintenance requirements of cosmic order, providing conceptual frameworks that influence historical and eschatological thought in subsequent religious traditions. The extensive cultural influence of Mesopotamian deities and religious concepts extended far beyond the geographical boundaries of ancient Iraq and Syria, shaping religious developments throughout the ancient world through processes of cultural diffusion, commercial exchange, military conquest, and voluntary adoption that spread Mesopotamian theological innovations across vast regions and diverse civilizations. Archaeological evidence for the presence of Mesopotamian religious artifacts, iconographic motifs, and architectural elements at sites throughout the ancient Near East demonstrates the widespread appeal and adaptability of Mesopotamian religious concepts, with local populations modifying and reinterpreting these divine figures to address their own cultural needs and religious concerns. The goddess Ishtar's transformation into various regional manifestations, including Ashtoreth among the Canaanites, Astarte in the Levant, and Cybele in Anatolia, reveal sophisticated processes of religious syncretism where core theological concepts were preserved while surface features were modified to accommodate local cultural preferences and existing religious traditions. Cuneiform texts discovered at sites like Ugarit, Amar, and other Syrian cities reveal extensive adoption of Mesopotamian religious literature, including modified versions of major mythological cycles, adaptation of ritual practices, and integration of Mesopotamian deities into local pantheons, demonstrating active cultural exchange and theological borrowing across political and linguistic boundaries. The influence of Mesopotamian flood narratives on Hebrew biblical literature, most notably the parallels between the Atrahasis epic and the Noah story, reveals sophisticated processes of literary and theological transmission where fundamental narrative structures and theological concepts were preserved, while being reinterpreted within new cultural and religious contexts. Archaeological investigation of temples dedicated to Mesopotamian deities and regions, far from their original cultural context, including sites in Iran, Turkey, and the Levant, demonstrates the practical impact of religious diffusion and the ability of these theological concepts to provide meaningful frameworks for diverse populations facing similar existential and practical challenges. The adoption of Mesopotamian divination techniques throughout the ancient world, evidenced by the discovery of liver models, astronomical texts, and dream interpretation manuals at sites from Egypt to India, reveals the perceived effectiveness and reliability of these religious technologies for addressing universal human concerns about the future and divine will. Commercial texts from ancient trade centers like Kanish and Mari document the role of merchants and traders in spreading religious concepts, with business partnerships often involving religious oaths, divine sanctions for contract violations, and shared ritual practices that facilitated trust and cooperation across cultural and linguistic boundaries. The integration of Mesopotamian astronomical and mathematical knowledge into religious systems throughout the ancient world demonstrates the sophisticated technical achievements of Mesopotamian pre-scholars and the practical utility of their observational and computational methods for maintaining religious calendars and conducting ritual activities. Greek mythological traditions show clear evidence of Mesopotamian influence, including narrative parallels, theological concepts, and iconographic elements that were adapted and reinterpreted within Greek cultural contexts, demonstrating the long-term impact of Mesopotamian religious thought on classical civilization and subsequent Western cultural development. The presence of Mesopotamian religious motifs in Roman imperial art and architecture reveals the continued relevance and adaptability of these ancient religious concepts even within radically different political and cultural contexts, with Roman emperors adopting divine symbols and theological concepts that originated in ancient Sumer to legitimize their authority and connect their rule to cosmic order. The archaeological record from Hellenistic period sites throughout the Eastern Mediterranean demonstrates extensive syncretism between Mesopotamian and Greek religious traditions, with new composite deities emerging that combine characteristics from both cultural systems while addressing the religious needs of ethnically diverse populations in cosmopolitan urban centers. The influence of Mesopotamian religious law and ethical concepts on developing Jewish legal traditions, evidenced through comparative analysis of biblical and cuneiform legal texts, reveal sophisticated processes of cultural adaptation where fundamental principles about divine justice, moral responsibility, and community obligations were preserved while being reinterpreted within monotheistic theological frameworks. The spread of Mesopotamian religious festivals and ritual practices throughout the ancient world, documented through inscriptions, papyrus texts, and archaeological evidence from multiple sites, demonstrates the universal appeal of these ceremonial activities and their effectiveness in creating community solidarity, while maintaining connections to cosmic order and divine favor. The preservation of Mesopotamian religious texts in multiple ancient libraries, including the famous collection at Alexandria and smaller archives throughout the Hellenistic world, reveals systematic efforts to maintain access to this theological literature and suggests its continued relevance for educated elites seeking to understand divine nature and cosmic order. The influence of Mesopotamian creation mythology on Gnostic and other alternative religious movements within the Roman Empire demonstrates the enduring power of these narrative frameworks to address fundamental questions about reality, divine nature, and human destiny, even when reinterpreted within radically different theological contexts. Archaeological evidence for the continued worship of Mesopotamian deities in late antiquity, including temple dedications, votive inscriptions, and ritual objects from sites throughout the former Persian and Hellenistic territories, reveals the remarkable persistence of these religious traditions despite centuries of political upheaval and cultural change. The integration of Mesopotamian astrological and magical practices into religious systems throughout the ancient world demonstrates the perceived effectiveness of these techniques for addressing practical concerns about health, prosperity, protection from harm, and success in various endeavors that remain constant across different cultural contexts. The influence of Mesopotamian kingship ideology on imperial systems throughout the ancient world, including Persian, Hellenistic, and Roman concepts of divine royal authority, reveals the enduring appeal of these theological frameworks for legitimizing political power and maintaining social stability within complex multi-ethnic empires. The transmission of Mesopotamian mathematical and astronomical knowledge through religious contexts demonstrates the integration of scientific and theological thought that characterized ancient intellectual culture, with religious institutions serving as centers for preserving and developing technical knowledge that contributed to cultural advancement. The adaptation of Mesopotamian architectural forms, particularly ziggurat-style temple construction, in regions as distant as Central Asia and the Indus Valley reveals the practical utility and symbolic power of these religious building types for creating sacred space and demonstrating community devotion to divine authority. The influence of Mesopotamian religious art and iconography on developing Christian artistic traditions, evidenced through comparative analysis of early Christian and ancient Near Eastern visual motifs, demonstrates the complex processes through which ancient religious symbols were reinterpreted and given new meanings. Within emerging theological contexts, the preservation of Mesopotamian religious concepts within Islamic theological and mystical traditions, evidenced through textual analysis and historical documentation, reveals the remarkable continuity of certain fundamental religious ideas across major religious transitions and cultural transformations. The archaeological evidence for Mesopotamian religious influence in ancient China, India, and other distant regions suggests that these theological concepts and practices spread along trade routes and through cultural exchange networks that connected diverse civilizations across vast geographical distances. The continued influence of Mesopotamian religious themes in contemporary literature, art, and popular culture demonstrates the enduring power of these ancient narratives and theological concepts to address universal human concerns about meaning, mortality, divine justice, and the relationship between individual and cosmic order. The archaeological rediscovery and scholarly interpretation of Mesopotamian religious traditions began during the 19th century when European excavations first uncovered the massive tells that concealed ancient cities throughout modern Iraq and Syria, with pioneering archaeologists like Austin Henry Layard, Hormuz Rassam, and Paul-Émile Botta literally unearthing evidence for civilizations that had been lost to human memory for over 2 millennia. The initial discoveries at sites like Nimrud, Khorsabad, and Nineveh revealed not only spectacular artistic achievements and architectural wonders, but also thousands of cuneiform tablets that preserve the religious literature, mythological narratives, and theological concepts of ancient Mesopotamian civilizations, providing modern scholars with unprecedented access to humanity's earliest systematic religious thought. The decipherment of cuneiform script, achieved through the brilliant work of scholars like Georg Friedrich Grotefend, Henry Rawlinson, and Jules Oppert, represented one of the greatest intellectual achievements of the 19th century, enabling modern researchers to read the actual words of ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian priests, poets, and theologians who had created these religious traditions millennia before the emergence of classical Greek philosophy or biblical literature. Archaeological excavation techniques developed specifically for Mesopotamian sites, including stratigraphic analysis, ceramic topology, and architectural documentation, have enabled scholars to trace the evolution of religious practices through time, revealing how theological concepts, ritual procedures, and institutional structures developed and changed in response to political upheavals, cultural exchanges, and social transformations. The establishment of major cuneiform collections at institutions like the British Museum, the Louvre, the Pergamon Museum, and university libraries throughout the world has created research infrastructure that supports ongoing scholarly investigation into Mesopotamian religious traditions, with new discoveries and interpretations continuing to expand our understanding of these ancient theological systems. Modern linguistic analysis of religious texts has revealed the sophisticated literary techniques employed by ancient Mesopotamian authors, including complex poetic structures, sophisticated narrative strategies, and theological concepts that demonstrate intellectual achievements comparable to the greatest works of world literature and religious thought. The application of comparative methodology to Mesopotamian religious studies has enabled scholars to identify both universal elements of human religious experience and distinctive features of ancient Near Eastern theological thought, contributing to broader understanding of religious development, cultural transmission, and the relationship between religious belief and social organization. Digital humanities projects that create searchable databases of cuneiform texts, archaeological data, and scholarly interpretations have revolutionized Mesopotamian religious studies, enabling researchers to conduct comprehensive analyses that would have been impossible using traditional research methods and facilitating collaborative international research efforts. Archaeological investigation of previously unexplored sites throughout Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey continues to yield new discoveries that expand our knowledge of Mesopotamian religious traditions, including temples, ritual objects, and textual materials that provide fresh perspectives on ancient theological concepts and practices. The integration of scientific techniques like DNA analysis, isotope studies, and advanced dating methods into Mesopotamian archaeology has enabled scholars to understand better the social contexts within which these religious traditions developed, including population movements, trade relationships, and environmental factors that influence religious thought and practice. Modern efforts to preserve and protect Mesopotamian archaeological sites and cultural heritage, particularly in the face of recent conflicts and looting, represent crucial attempts to maintain access to these irreplaceable resources for future generations of scholars and the global community that benefits from understanding humanity's earliest religious and cultural achievements. The translation and publication of Mesopotamian religious texts in modern languages has made these ancient theological works accessible to scholars and educated readers throughout the world, contributing to broader cultural understanding and appreciation of humanity's earliest attempts to grapple with fundamental questions about existence, divinity, and moral responsibility. The influence of Mesopotamian religious discoveries on modern religious studies, comparative mythology, and theological scholarship has been profound, providing concrete evidence for religious development, cultural transmission, and the evolution of theological concepts that has transformed academic understanding of religion's role in human culture and civilization. Contemporary archaeological projects in Mesopotamia utilize advanced technology, including satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and three-dimensional modeling to locate and document religious sites while minimizing destructive excavation, representing sophisticated approaches to cultural heritage preservation and scientific investigation. The application of anthropological and sociological methods to the study of Mesopotamian religion has enabled scholars to understand better how these ancient belief systems function within their original social contexts, providing insights into the relationship between religious belief and social organization that remain relevant for understanding contemporary religious phenomena. International collaborative efforts to study Mesopotamian religion, involving scholars from universities and research institutions throughout the world, demonstrate the global significance of these ancient traditions and the benefits of international cooperation in advancing human knowledge about our shared cultural heritage. The development of specialized museums and educational programs devoted to Mesopotamian culture and religion has made these ancient achievements accessible to broader public audiences, contributing to cultural education and international understanding, while preserving and interpreting humanity's earliest religious and cultural traditions. The ongoing publication of scholarly editions, translations, and commentaries on Mesopotamian religious texts ensures that this ancient wisdom remains available for study and reflection, contributing to ongoing dialogues about religion, culture, and human meaning that transcend particular cultural and temporal boundaries. Modern archaeological ethics and cultural heritage protection efforts have established international standards for the respectful investigation and preservation of Mesopotamian religious sites, recognizing these locations as important cultural resources that belong to all humanity, rather than merely to modern political entities or private collectors. The enduring legacy and contemporary relevance of Mesopotamian religious traditions extend far beyond their historical significance, continuing to influence modern religious thought, literary expression, and cultural understanding while providing profound insights into the fundamental questions that have occupied human consciousness. Throughout history, the theological concepts developed by ancient Mesopotamian thinkers, including ideas about divine justice, cosmic order, moral responsibility, and the relationship between divine and human authority, continue to resonate within contemporary religious and philosophical discourse, demonstrating the enduring relevance of humanity's earliest systematic attempts to understand ultimate reality and meaning. Archaeological evidence for the practical wisdom embedded within Mesopotamian religious traditions, including sophisticated approaches to community organization, conflict resolution, social welfare, and cultural preservation, provides valuable perspectives on contemporary challenges facing modern societies. seeking to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility and material prosperity with spiritual fulfillment. The literary achievements of Mesopotamian religious authors, particularly masterpieces like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Enuma Elish, continue to inspire contemporary writers, poets, and artists who find in these ancient narratives timeless themes and universal insights that remain relevant for modern audiences, grappling with questions about mortality, friendship, power, and the search for meaning. The sophisticated understanding of human psychology revealed in Mesopotamian religious texts, including nuanced treatments of grief, fear, hope, love, and moral conflict, demonstrates psychological insights that parallel and sometimes exceed those found in much later philosophical and religious traditions, suggesting fundamental continuities in human nature and experience across historical periods. Modern therapeutic and counseling approaches have drawn upon Mesopotamian religious wisdom, particularly insights about the relationship between individual and community well-being, the importance of ritual and ceremony in processing trauma and transition, and the role of narrative and meaning-making in psychological healing and personal development. The environmental consciousness embedded within Mesopotamian religious traditions, including concepts about the sacred relationship between humans and the natural world, the importance of agricultural sustainability, and the moral implications of resource management, provides valuable perspectives on contemporary environmental challenges and the spiritual dimensions of ecological responsibility. Educational institutions throughout the world have incorporated study of Mesopotamian religion into curricula addressing world religions, comparative mythology, ancient history, and cultural anthropology, recognizing these traditions as fundamental components of human cultural heritage that provide essential context for understanding subsequent religious and philosophical developments. The influence of Mesopotamian religious art and architecture continues to inspire contemporary artists, architects, and designers who draw upon ancient motifs, symbolic systems, and aesthetic principles while adapting them to address modern cultural needs and artistic expressions, demonstrating the continued vitality and relevance of these ancient creative traditions. International museums and cultural institutions continue to develop exhibitions, educational programs, and research projects devoted to Mesopotamian religious traditions, recognizing their importance for promoting cross-cultural understanding, historical awareness, and appreciation for humanity's diverse religious and cultural achievements. The methodological innovations developed by scholars studying Mesopotamian religion, including approaches to textual analysis, archaeological interpretation, and comparative religious studies, have contributed significantly to broader academic disciplines and continue to influence scholarly approaches to understanding ancient cultures and religious traditions throughout the world. Contemporary interfaith dialogue and comparative religious studies have benefited significantly from increased knowledge about Mesopotamian religious traditions, which provide important historical context for understanding the development of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while also revealing alternative approaches to theological questions and religious practice that broaden contemporary religious discourse. The preservation and study of Mesopotamian religious traditions serve as powerful reminders of humanity's capacity for spiritual insight, cultural creativity, and theological sophistication, demonstrating that profound religious thought and meaningful spiritual practice have characterized human civilization from its earliest beginnings, and continue to offer valuable resources for contemporary spiritual seeking and religious understanding. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to reveal new aspects of Mesopotamian religious life, including evidence for previously unknown deities, ritual practices, and theological concepts that expand our understanding of these ancient traditions, while demonstrating the ongoing potential for new discoveries that may further transform scholarly understanding of humanity's earliest religious achievements. The integration of Mesopotamian religious studies with other academic disciplines, including anthropology, psychology, sociology, environmental studies, and literary criticism, has produced innovative interdisciplinary approaches that provide fresh insights into both ancient religious traditions and contemporary human concerns, demonstrating the continued relevance and intellectual vitality of these ancient theological systems. Contemporary religious communities have drawn inspiration from Mesopotamian spiritual practices, including approaches to ritual, meditation, seasonal celebration, and community worship that address modern spiritual needs, while connecting contemporary practitioners to humanity's earliest religious traditions and the profound wisdom embedded within these ancient theological systems. The global significance of Mesopotamian religious traditions as components of world cultural heritage requires ongoing international cooperation to ensure their preservation, study, and interpretation for future generations, recognizing these ancient achievements as invaluable resources for understanding human spirituality, cultural development, and the eternal quest for meaning that characterizes human consciousness across all historical periods and cultural contexts.